It was the kind of house that looked quiet from the outside, 2 stories, painted white, set back from the road with a porch that sagged in the middle. You wouldn't think anything bad could happen there. But Ruth knew better. She'd been locked in that attic for 13 days now, counting every hour by the light that slipped through the one small, dirty window. The baby inside her kicked sometimes, soft and uncertain, as if asking whether it was safe to come out. Ruth didn't have an answer. She used to be proud. She used to walk with her chin up, even if her dress was threadbare and her boots pinched. Her flaw wasn't pride, though. It was the belief that love, once spoken, could never be taken back. She trusted that promise too deeply. The one whispered to her behind the church house by a man who smelled like gunpowder and leather and hope. He told her he'd come back. That was a long time ago. His name was Jack, and he wore a scar that started at the corner of his left eyebrow and slid down just past his cheekbone. It wasn't ugly, not to her. It was a story he never told, but she always thought it had to do with a war or a bad deal that ended in blood. She'd known him for 2 months before he left. He said he had to finish something first, something dangerous. He promised he'd return for her before anyone knew she was carrying his child. But Ruth's belly had grown faster than he returned, and folks in town started to talk. Her parents had died in a fire 3 winters back, and with no kin of her own, Ruth had been taken in by the Winthrops, the family of the man she'd been promised to before Jack ever rode into her life. Harold Winthrop was cold from the start. He didn't touch her after the wedding, not even on their wedding night. He barely looked at her belly, except with disgust. When she tried to tell him the baby wasn't his, that she'd made a mistake, he told her he already knew. Then he smiled, calming, and said she'd pay for it. They took her upstairs the next morning. His mother, Miriam, didn't speak a word, just handed Ruth a stack of quilts and closed the attic door. There wasn't even a lock outside, just a heavy iron bolt on the inside of the door frame, hammered in so she couldn't open it, like she was a ghost they wanted to forget. At first, she thought maybe someone would help. Maybe the preacher, or old Mrs. Lantry who used to give her work mending dresses. But the town was too small, too silent, and the Winthrops were too respected. Everyone saw what they wanted to see. Downstairs, she could hear them sometimes. The scrape of boots, voices arguing low, the sound of supper dishes. Once, she heard Harold laughing with another woman, and her stomach turned. They were waiting for her to give birth. Ruth didn't know if they planned to take the baby or leave it up there with her. Either way, they didn't want her speaking about who the real father was. The Winthrops had a name to protect. She was just a mistake they were trying to erase quietly. She lay awake most nights, pressing her hand to her belly, whispering to the child she hadn't even seen yet. "You got a father," she'd say, even if she didn't know where he was. "He's out there, and he's trying. He's got to be." Sometimes she said it like a prayer. Sometimes it was a lie she told herself to keep breathing. But Jack hadn't forgotten her. He hadn't meant to leave for so long. After he left town, he got caught up in something dark, something to do with land claims and a mining outfit that didn't play fair. He'd gone in to make enough money to marry her proper, to give her a home that didn't creak when you walked across the floor. Instead, he barely got out with his life. The scar on his face was nothing compared to what had happened to his soul. Still, he remembered her every day. He carried a small scrap of her handkerchief in his coat pocket, wrapped tight, like it was holding his ribs together. He didn't write, because he couldn't risk someone intercepting the letters. He made enemies. But when it was over, when the last man was buried and the mine closed, he rode straight back, tired and wounded, not knowing what he'd find. What he found was silence. The house was quiet when he arrived, too quiet. No sign of Ruth. The townsfolk looked at him like they didn't recognize his face, or maybe like they wished they didn't. He asked questions, got vague answers. Someone said she married Harold Winthrop. Someone else said she wasn't feeling well. A few turned their backs and walked off. Only one person, an old man who used to shoe horses, said anything close to the truth. She ain't been seen in weeks. Winthrop's mother says she went to stay with family, but that girl ain't got no kin. "You asked me," something's foul in that house. That was all Jack needed. That night, while the town slept and the wind rose like a whisper, he crept up the hill to the White House. He stayed low, watched the windows for hours. Finally, he saw Harold stumble drunk across the parlor, and Jack knew his moment had come. He moved like a shadow, fast and steady. He didn't knock. Ruth didn't know if the sound she heard was real. At first, it came like a thud, a shuffle, a voice muffled under wood and dust. Her breath caught. She sat up, heart hammering, hand pressed to her stomach as if the baby could hear it too. Then she heard her name, quiet, hoarse. Ruth. She crawled to the door, knees weak. Her fingers trembled as she reached under the crack, her voice barely above a whisper. Jack! The door didn't open right away. She heard a curse, the sound of something heavy being moved, with splintering. And then the door creaked open, and there he was, leaner than she remembered, eyes tired, clothes dusty, but real. Alive. She burst into tears. He stepped into the attic and wrapped her in his arms without a word, his body shaking as if he couldn't believe she was real either. And for a moment, time stopped. They were just two broken people trying to hold on to something that hadn't yet slipped away. But the world hadn't stopped with them. Downstairs, voices rose. Footsteps thundered. The house was waking up. Jack pressed his forehead to hers. We're getting out of here. Now. And Ruth nodded, even as her legs buckled beneath her. Even as the pain in her belly told her the baby wasn't waiting anymore. Jack had never been a man who trusted easily. Even as he helped Ruth down the narrow attic stairs, his hand firm at her back, his eyes stayed sharp. The house creaked like it was holding its breath. He didn't know who else might be inside, or how many were loyal to Harold Winthrop. Ruth clung to him, one arm across her belly, the other tight around his neck. She was pale, sweat shining on her forehead, and he could feel her shaking. Every step was a risk, but they had no choice. That baby was coming, and so was trouble. They made it to the back door just as it swung open. A woman stood there, Miriam Winthrop, tall and cold, wrapped in a thick robe. Her face was stone. Jack didn't know her, but he knew her type. Power didn't come from strength with women like her. It came from silence and control. She's not going anywhere, Miriam said, voice quiet as snow. Jack didn't speak. He didn't have to. The knife he pulled from his belt said more than words. Miriam's eyes narrowed, but she didn't move. Her hand stayed at her sides, calm. But her voice hit like a match to kindling. She's about to bleed in the cold. She won't make it past the fence. She'll make it, Jack said, and they left her standing there, never turning their backs. The yard was wide, open, too exposed for comfort. Jack half-carried Ruth through the gate, the sky above them graying with morning. A storm was coming, the kind that turned roads to rivers and swallowed trails. He needed shelter and fast. That's when he thought of Tobe. Tobe had been a scout during the war, half Comanche, half white, and more shadow than man. They hadn't parted on the best of terms, but Jack knew Tobe lived close, just past the canyon, tucked between the rocks where most folks wouldn't dare settle. Tobe kept himself these days. Folks said he was cursed, but Jack knew better. Tobe wasn't cursed. He was just done with people. It took half a day to reach him, Ruth going quiet more than once, her breathing shallow. When Tobe opened his door and saw them, his eyes went wide, but only for a second. Then he stepped back and let them in without a word. Tobe's cabin was small but clean. A fire burned low in the stone hearth. There were herbs hanging from the rafters and a rifle leaning by the door. Ruth collapsed on the only bed while Jack explained, short and tight, the trouble they were in. Tobe listened without blinking. She's not safe yet, Tobe said when Jack finished. Neither are you. He wasn't wrong. Back in town, word spread fast. The Winthrops said Ruth had run off in madness, that she'd taken a knife, that Jack had broken into their home and threatened their lives. They painted a picture of a dangerous man, returned to finish what he started. Harold, of course, played the wounded husband. He stood on the church steps with bandages across his cheek and his voice shaking. said he feared for the safety of his unborn child. Not everyone believed him. Josie Lantry, a seamstress and old friend of Ruth's, heard the whispers and didn't like what she was hearing. Josie had always been sharp. She'd seen the bruises Ruth tried to hide months ago, noticed when she stopped showing up in town. Josie started asking questions, quietly but directly. She spoke to the stable boy who'd seen Jack ride in. She cornered the preacher's wife, who'd once visited the Winthrop house and come back pale and silent. Josie didn't have proof, but she had suspicion, and that was dangerous enough. At the same time, Harold wasn't just playing victim. He was planning. There was another man involved now, someone Jack didn't know yet. His name was Sheriff Dane Rourke, and he'd only been in town a year. He was young for the badge, quiet, with dark hair and a gaze that stayed too long. He'd come from somewhere back east and rarely spoke of his past. Most folks liked him well enough, but Rourke had his own reasons for siding with the Winthrops. What no one knew was that Miriam Winthrop had dirt on him, a secret that tied Rourke's hands. Years ago, in another town under another name, Rourke had been on the wrong side of the law. Miriam had found out, and she'd been using it to make him useful ever since. Now she needed him to find Jack and bring Ruth back, quietly, before anyone asked too many questions. But Rourke wasn't a fool. He didn't like being used, and he didn't like what he was starting to learn about the Winthrops. He knew their kind: old money, mean pride, cold justice. Still, he had his own survival to think about. So he rode out, saying he was hunting a fugitive, but not saying much else. Meanwhile, at Tobe's cabin, Ruth's labor came hard and fast. The pain broke through her like thunder, her screams echoing off the canyon walls. Tobe worked with a calmness Jack couldn't understand, boiling water, muttering prayers in Comanche, grinding herbs between his fingers. Jack held Ruth's hand through it all, tears running down both their faces. He'd never seen strength like hers. By nightfall, a baby girl lay crying on Tobe's bed, wrapped in soft cloth. Ruth was too weak to speak at first, but when she did, her voice was full of awe. "She looks like you," she whispered. Jack didn't answer. He just looked down at the tiny face, then at Ruth, and something inside him cracked open. He'd been running for so long, chasing freedom, chasing revenge, chasing redemption, but now he had something real to protect. Tobe warned them they couldn't stay long. Someone would come looking. He said he could get them to the old mission across the border. Safe ground, out of reach of the town's lies. But it would take days, and the route wasn't easy. The next morning, they heard horses. Not many, 2 or 3. Tobe and Jack stepped outside, rifles ready. Rourke sat atop his bay mare, hat pulled low, hand near his holster. "I'm not here to drag anyone back," Rourke said quietly. "I just need to know the truth." Jack didn't lower his rifle. "You already know it." Rourke nodded slowly. "Yeah, I think I do." He looked past them, through the open cabin door, and saw Ruth sitting up with the baby in her arms. "I can stall them," he said. "Buy you time, but this place won't hold forever." And just like that, the sheriff turned and rode back down the trail, leaving more questions behind than answers. Jack didn't trust him. Not fully. But Ruth had seen something in Rourke's face that made her believe he'd lost something too. Something that kept him walking the line between justice and survival. Back in town, Josie made her move. She showed up at the church with a letter, one Jack had written to Ruth, found hidden in her old sewing kit. She read it out loud to anyone who would listen. It spoke of love, of plans, of truth. And for the first time, the town began to doubt the Winthrop's version of the story. But Miriam had played this game too long to let it fall apart now. She sent Harold to do what she couldn't. She told him to find them, to bring the baby back, to finish it. Harold rode out that night with 2 hired men, a shotgun, and a fury that masked something deeper: shame. Because Harold had his own secret too. He'd known Ruth wasn't his before they even married. Knew his mother had forced the whole thing to protect their name. And deep down, Harold hated himself for playing along. But he hated Ruth more, for loving someone else, for not breaking. Now, the lines were drawn. Allies and enemies. secrets crawling out of every crack. And in the canyon, a man with a scar held his family close, not knowing that the fight was only just beginning. The days that followed felt borrowed, fragile like glass on a rocking cart. Every morning Jack woke with one arm around Ruth and the other near his rifle. The baby, whom they hadn't yet named, slept tucked between them, breathing softly, unaware of the storm circling just beyond the canyon walls. There was peace in those small hours when the world was still and warm, and for the briefest time, Ruth could pretend they were just a family living ordinary lives. Tobe was up before sunrise each day, checking traps, boiling herbs, moving like a ghost through the brush. He didn't say much, but his presence grounded them. He taught Jack how to cover their tracks better, how to read the air for signs of movement. Ruth watched them from the cabin doorway, baby in her arms, and for the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to believe they might survive this. There were moments, small, fleeting, when she even smiled. Naming the baby happened during one of those moments. Ruth had been humming to her, soft and tired, when Jack sat beside her and asked, "What should we call her?" Ruth didn't answer at first. She stared at the baby's face, so new and small, like a secret the world hadn't found out yet. "Lena," she said finally, "after my mother." Jack nodded. He reached out and touched the baby's tiny hand. "Lena," he repeated. "That's good." They didn't say it out loud, but the name made her real, more than just a reason to run, more than just a child born in hiding. She was theirs, and for now, she was safe. But safety was a thread unraveling. On the third day, Tobe returned from scouting with news that chilled them. He'd spotted Harold's men near the canyon's mouth, two of them, close together, circling slow like they didn't want to spook anything. "They're tracking," Tobe said. "They ain't sure where yet. But they're patient." Jack stiffened. "How long do we have?" "Not long," Tobe said. "A day. Maybe less." Jack looked at Ruth, who was nursing Lena by the fire. Her eyes met his, and in them he saw it. Fear, but also something deeper. Determination. That night, Ruth couldn't sleep. She sat on the edge of the bed, cradling Lena, rocking her slowly. Jack moved beside her and sat close, rubbing her back. She leaned into him, and her voice came low. "I'm scared," she said. "Not of dying, of her growing up without us." Jack took a breath. "That won't happen. You don't know that." "No, but I'll die trying to keep it from happening." Ruth looked at him. "I know you will, but you can't do it alone." She wasn't talking about Tobe, or even the sheriff who disappeared back into town. She meant herself. She meant that no matter how much pain she'd been through, locked in that attic, humiliated, forgotten, she wasn't going to hide behind him. Not anymore. She wanted to fight for their daughter. So they made a plan. Tobe knew of an old mission a day's ride south, abandoned mostly, but sometimes used by traders and passers-by. There were people there who owed him favors. If they could get there, they might be able to disappear. Change names. Start again. It wouldn't be easy. The trail was rough. Ruth was still weak, and Lena still too small for the cold. But they had no choice. Before dawn, they packed what they could. Tobe loaded food and supplies onto his mule. Jack took Lena and wrapped her close to his chest, inside his coat, her head peeking out. Ruth walked beside him, hand never leaving the knife Tobe had given her. They moved quickly, sticking to rock and shadow, speaking only in gestures. For a time, it worked, but by mid-afternoon, the stillness broke. A shot rang out, sharp, close, and a bullet hit the tree just inches from Jack's head. He dropped low, covering Lena. Ruth spun, pulling her knife. Tobe dove behind a boulder, rifle up. Two men appeared at the ridge. One of them was Harold. The other was unknown, stocky, with a scar across his nose and a long rifle slung lazy across his back. "You can't run forever, Jack," Harold shouted. "Give her up and walk away." Ruth stepped forward before Jack could stop her. Her voice cracked from disuse, but it held. "She's not yours," she shouted. "You never wanted her, Harold. You just wanted me quiet." Harold's face twisted. "You think anyone will believe you over me?" You're just a whore who got caught lying. Jack raised his rifle. Then maybe they'll believe me after I put you in the ground. The standoff cracked wide open. Another shot, this one grazing Tobe's shoulder. Ruth grabbed Lena from Jack and ducked behind a tree. Jack returned fire, the world narrowing to gunpowder and breath. The fight didn't last long. Tobe, bleeding but focused, dropped the hired man with a clean shot to the chest. Jack clipped Harold's arm, and the man dropped his gun, crying out. He scrambled behind cover, cursing them all. Then came the sound of hooves. Sheriff Rourke. He rode in hard, rifle ready, eyes sharp. He didn't speak. He aimed, and Harold, realizing he was outnumbered and outgunned, ran. Rourke dismounted slowly, guns still up, scanning the ridge. When the silence held, he finally lowered it and looked at Jack. You all right? Jack nodded. We are now. Rourke walked to Tobe, handed him a clean cloth for his shoulder. I won't stop you, he said. Not after what I've seen. Ruth stepped forward. Why are you helping us? Rourke looked at her, something heavy in his eyes. Because I've stood on the wrong side before. It doesn't go away. He handed Jack a folded paper. It's a warrant. Miriam filed it yesterday. Claimed you kidnapped Ruth and took the child under threat. Ruth laughed, bitter. She's still trying to control the story. Rourke nodded. You've got until sundown tomorrow. After that, I can't protect you. You need to be gone. That night, they made camp in a dry gully. Ruth fed Lena while Jack cleaned Tobe's wound. The fire burned low, casting shadows. Jack sat beside Ruth, took her hand. You saved me today, he said. She looked at him, eyes shining in the dark. No, you saved me the day you came back. They kissed, quiet and slow, like they were memorizing each other. There was love in it, but more than that, trust. Forged through pain and struggle and a fight neither had asked for. As the fire crackled, Tobe spoke up. There's a place I know, far south. No law, no names. You could live there, if you'd keep your heads down. Ruth nodded. We don't need much. Just peace. Jack looked at Lena, sleeping beside the fire. She deserves to grow up free. Tobe handed Jack a folded map, marked with a red X, then go before first light. And they did. By the time the sun rose, they were gone. Rourke rode into town later that day and told the Winthrops he'd found nothing. That Jack and Ruth had vanished into the wilderness. Miriam didn't believe him, but there was no proof. No body, no trail. A year later, a letter arrived at Josie Lantry's shop. No return address. Inside was a photograph, a man, a woman, and a baby girl standing in front of a small adobe house under a wide, cloudless sky. On the back, written in simple handwriting, her name is Lena. She laughs in her sleep. And Josie smiled, folded the photo, and tucked it away. Some stories don't end with justice. Some end with escape. And sometimes that's enough. The dry wind whipped through the canyon like it knew something no one had said yet. Ruth pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders. The desert sun still warm on her skin, but not quite enough to chase off the chill that had taken root deep inside her. Lena was asleep in a bundle of blankets beneath the cottonwood tree, her tiny chest rising and falling like the calm before a storm. Jack stood watch just beyond, eyes scanning the distant ridge, rifle in hand. Every movement made his jaw tighten, like he was waiting for something to break. It wasn't peace they'd found, it was a pause. A long, breath-held moment before everything caught up. The mission Tobe had spoken of turned out to be more ruin than shelter. The old stone walls still stood, barely, worn smooth by time and wind, but the roof was half gone, and the single well had dried to dust. Still, it was hidden, and that counted for something. They patched the roof with tarps and wood from a wagon wreck they found along the trail. It wasn't much, but it kept the wind off Lena, and it gave Ruth enough time to rest, to heal from the birth, to stop bleeding. But the longer they stayed, the more the cracks in their plan began to show. Food was scarce. The desert didn't offer much, and what little Tobe could trap or shoot wasn't enough to keep 3 adults and a growing infant strong. Ruth's milk was thinning, and Lena started to fuss more, her cries brittle and hungry. They boiled cactus pads, ground wild seeds, made bitter tea from creosote, but it wasn't enough. Then came the fever. It hit Ruth first, slow, creeping like a weight on her chest. She tried to hide it, told Jack she was just tired, but the sweat gave her away. Her skin turned pale, her eyes hollow. She couldn't keep food down. The baby whimpered and rooted, but Ruth's milk dried up completely. Jack panicked. He rode to a mining camp 2 ridges over, trading his last silver ring for goat's milk and bread. It wasn't enough. He came back gaunt, sunburnt, and furious with himself. "She needs more," he said, laying the milk down beside Ruth. "We need more than what we've got." Ruth tried to speak, but her voice cracked like dry earth. "You can't keep riding out. They'll see you." "I don't care. You have to." For her. They fought quietly, tense and tired, both too scared to say what they were really thinking. If Ruth died, it would all come apart. Tobe watched them from the corner of the room. He didn't say much until that night, after Lena had finally stopped crying and the wind had died down. Then he stood and looked Jack dead in the eye. "There's a trader I know," he said. "Passes through a Navajo camp a few miles west of here. He might have medicine, but I can't go alone. He don't trust me much. You'll have to come." Jack hesitated. "And leave them?" Tobe nodded. "It's 1 day's ride. In and out. If you don't go, she won't make it." Ruth squeezed Jack's hand. "Go," she said. The next morning, Jack and Tobe left. Ruth watched them ride off with her lips pressed tight, her body aching with fever. The baby whimpered at her breast, and she held her close, whispering promises she wasn't sure she could keep. The days stretched long. Ruth hallucinated, sometimes seeing her mother in the shadows, sometimes thinking she was still in the attic, belly swollen, breath short, the scent of mold and dust choking her lungs. She'd wake gasping, clutching Lena to her chest, terrified the walls would close in again. But she didn't let go. She forced herself to boil water, to clean Lena's skin, to wrap her tighter when the nights dipped cold. She sang lullabies even when her voice broke. She pressed a knife under her pillow, just in case. Then, on the second night, the fire flared out without warning, and the silence changed. It was a small sound, footsteps, soft, deliberate crunching on gravel. Ruth didn't move. Her heart slammed her chest. Lena stirred in her sleep. Someone was outside. She reached for the knife, moved to the door, and opened it just enough to see a figure slipping through the dark. Not Jack, not Tobe. This one was thinner, hunched, limping slightly. And then a voice. "Whoa, thought you could hide from me forever." "Miriam." Ruth froze. She hadn't heard that voice in weeks. Not since the attic door slammed shut and left her in the dark, pregnant, broken, alone. "I should have had you buried," Miriam hissed. "Should have left you in the ground like the mistake you are." She stepped closer. In one hand she held a lantern, in the other a pistol. Her eyes were wild, hair pinned tight, but her face looked thinner, harsher. "You're not taking her," Ruth said, stepping into the doorway, knife raised. "She's not yours. She never was." Miriam laughed, sharp, cold. "You think anyone cares what you say? You're filth. A stain on this family. That child is the only thing worth saving, and you don't deserve her." Behind them, Lena began to cry. Miriam's face twisted. "Give her to me." No, Miriam stepped forward. Ruth didn't move. Then, just as Miriam raised the pistol, a sound cut through the dark. Hooves. Fast. Jack. He charged in like thunder, rifle raised, not bothering to speak. Tobe was right behind him. Miriam turned toward them, stunned, and in that moment, Ruth lunged. The knife hit Miriam's arm. She screamed, dropped the pistol. Jack dismounted and tackled her, wrenching the weapon away. Tobe moved fast, grabbing rope from his saddle. They bound her hands and dragged her away from the cabin. She cursed them the whole time. "You'll rot for this. All of you. That baby's cursed. Just like her mother." Ruth didn't speak. She stood there, knife still in hand, shaking, chest heaving. and she dropped it and walked back inside to hold her daughter. It was over. For now. They left at dawn, took only what they needed, and burned what they couldn't carry. Miriam was left tied to a post beneath the mission's broken bell, her mouth gagged. Tobe left a note pinned to her coat. Justice catches up. Even out here. They rode south through canyon and brush, through land so dry it cracked beneath the hooves. But they didn't stop. They reached the borderlands by nightfall. There was a settlement there, small and tucked against the red cliffs, filled with people who asked no questions. They took Ruth and Lena in first, gave them water, blankets, rest. Jack stayed outside for a long time, watching the stars come out one by one. Tobe stood beside him. "She's strong," Tobe said. "She is," Jack replied. "Stronger than me." Tobe nodded. "You gonna marry her?" Jack looked at the window where Ruth sat in the candlelight, rocking Lena. "Yeah," he said, "if she'll still have me." Inside, Ruth held her daughter close, whispering stories of a life that might finally begin again. A life not stolen, not silent, not hidden. She had been locked away, forgotten. But not anymore. She was a mother, a fighter, a survivor, and a man with the scar, the one who made a promise long ago, had kept it. Even in a world that tried to bury her, Ruth had risen. And this time, she wasn't going back. The wind had shifted again, colder now, carrying the scent of rain far off in the mountains. Ruth sat on the rough wooden bench outside the little adobe house, her hands busy weaving strands of dry grass into a crude basket. Lena lay asleep in a cradle made from cloth and twigs, her breath soft and even, a small smile playing on her lips as if she dreamed of something better than the hard road they'd traveled. But Ruth's mind was miles away, back to a place she never wanted to revisit. The attic, the cold, dark room where she had been locked away like a prisoner, her body breaking beneath the weight of a secret no one was supposed to know. Her husband's betrayal, the cruelty of her in-laws, the cold snow where she had nearly died alone. That memory was a shadow that clung tight to her heart, and it wasn't going away on its own. Jack came up behind her, quiet like the dusk settling around them. He didn't say anything at first, just sat beside her and took her hand in his. There was a softness in his eyes, the kind of look that said he understood more than words could. "You don't have to carry it all alone," he said gently. Ruth shook her head. "It's not just mine." He tightened his grip. "I know, but you don't have to face it by yourself." For a long time, she said nothing. Then, slowly, she began to tell him about the day she first realized she was pregnant and how the news had been met with cold silence. About the locked attic, the loneliness, the fear that no one was coming back for her. About the night she lost the baby she carried there and how it had nearly broken her. Jack listened, every word like a blade cutting through his own soul. When she finished, tears were running down her cheeks, and she felt a weight lift, just a little, like the first crack of light through a dark window. "You're not weak," Jack said. "You're still here. You're still fighting." And in that moment, Ruth let herself believe it. But the past was not done with them yet. Word traveled faster than they expected. Miriam had been found and brought to justice. But her family was still powerful. Men who didn't forgive or forget easily. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky blood red, the sound of horses broke the quiet. Ruth's heart slammed against her ribs as Jack and Tobe stepped outside, weapons drawn. 5 riders appeared on the ridge, faces hidden by wide hats and dust. Their leader was a man Ruth recognized, a cousin of Miriam's, known for his temper and cold heart. "We're not done with you," the man called out, voice carrying across the plain like a threat. Jack stepped forward, steady. "You'll find nothing here." But they came down anyway, guns drawn, and the peaceful life they had built shattered like glass. The fight was brutal but brief. Jack and Tobe held the line, while Ruth gathered Lena and led the women inside the house. Bullets tore through wood and adobe. The cries of the wounded and the angry curses filled the air. At one point, Ruth heard a shout and the sound of a body hitting the ground. She rushed out, clutching Lena, and saw Jack on his knees, blood soaking through his shirt. "I'm all right," he gasped. "You're not," Ruth said, dropping to her knees beside him. Tobe fired into the darkness, forcing the attackers to retreat. When silence returned, Jack was carried inside, pale and shaken. Ruth's hands trembled as she tore cloth to bind his wound. "I thought I'd lost you," she whispered. "Never," he said, eyes fierce. "Not while you're here." That night, as Jack rested, Ruth sat by the fire, the weight of everything pressing down on her. But for the first time, she didn't feel alone. She had faced the darkness, stood against the men who wanted to destroy her, and survived. And she would keep surviving, for Lena, for Jack, for herself. The road ahead would be hard, but it was theirs now, together. The morning sun spilled soft gold over the horizon, painting the sky in gentle hues of pink and orange. Ruth stood by the window, watching as the village slowly came to life. Children's laughter floated faintly on the breeze, mingling with the distant hum of horses and carts. The air smelled of fresh earth and blooming sage, a reminder that even after the harshest storms, the land would heal, and so could people. The past months had been a harsh teacher, carving deep scars into her heart and mind. But here, surrounded by a small circle of friends and the quiet strength of the desert, Ruth found the pieces she thought she'd lost. Jack was outside, helping Tobe repair a fence that had been broken during the last raid. The sun warmed his broad shoulders and dirt-smudged face, and when he looked up and caught Ruth's gaze, a soft smile spread across his lips, the kind of smile that spoke of hope, of trust, and a future still waiting to be written. Ruth took a deep breath and stepped outside, feeling the dry grass crunch beneath her boots. Lena toddled toward her, chubby hands reaching out, eyes bright with wonder. She had grown stronger every day, her cries fewer, her smiles more frequent. "You ready for breakfast?" Ruth asked, scooping her daughter into her arms. Lena giggled, clutching her mother's neck. "Mama." The sound was simple, but to Ruth, it was everything. Later that day, the small group gathered near the old well, now cleaned and repaired. Neighbors brought dishes to share, wild berry pies, fresh bread, and smoked meat. It was a celebration of survival, of small victories won in the face of hardship. Tobe raised his cup, to Ruth for fighting like hell and never giving up. Jack followed, voice steady and proud, to family, the ones we choose and the ones we save. Ruth looked around at the faces shining in the late afternoon sun. Some were strangers once, but now they were her community, her strength. She felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the heat of the day, a kind of peace that comes from acceptance, forgiveness, and the courage to start again. In the days that followed, Ruth found herself opening up more. She spoke to the women in the village, sharing stories and laughter. She taught Lena how to catch a chicken, how to recognize the sweet smell of desert flowers, and how to keep hope alive even when the world seemed dark. One afternoon, Jack took her hand and led her to the edge of the canyon, where wildflowers bloomed against the red rocks. There, beneath the wide-open sky, he knelt and pulled a small, worn ring from his pocket. "For all the promises I made, and the ones I'll make," he said softly, "will you marry me?" Tears welled in Ruth's eyes, not just for the ring or the question, but for the man who stood before her, a man who had seen her at her worst and still chose to stay. "Yes," she whispered. They embraced, the wind carrying their laughter across the valley, a sound sweeter than any song. The wedding was simple but full of meaning. Neighbors gathered to watch two souls tied together by hardship, love, and unbreakable will. Ruth wore a dress she had sewn herself, the fabric faded but sewn with care and hope. Lena was the flower girl, scattering petals along the dusty path. As they exchanged vows, Ruth felt the weight of the past finally begin to lift. The attic, the snow, the betrayals, They were no longer chains, but shadows behind her, reminders of how far she had come. After the ceremony, Jack and Ruth stood hand in hand, looking out over the land they would call home. It wasn't perfect, and there would still be struggles ahead. But there was also promise, a future born not from fear, but from love. That night, as the stars spilled across the sky like scattered diamonds, Ruth held Lena close and whispered a quiet prayer. For healing, for peace, for the strength to keep moving forward. And somewhere deep inside, she knew the scarred man who had once made a promise would be proud. Because this was not just survival. This was a new beginning,